Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Russia House with Scott Ritter. I'm here in sunny Moscow. Just got back from the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, where I participated in a panel on diplomacy. Diplomacy to what end? Number one issue was the war in Ukraine. How do we bring about a peace? I got to watch President Putin speak about the very same issues. He talked about a letter that he had received from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that ostensibly talked the language of peace, but really promoted the concept of war. The letter was delivered right after a Ukrainian drone strike against St. Petersburg, just a few weeks after a Ukrainian drone strike that murdered 21 innocent teenage college kids in Starobelsk. What are the prospects of peace, and what are the challenges that those who seek peace will face? This is one of the topics I'll be discussing with my guest today, Vasyl Porozov. Thank you very much for joining me. You have a unique history. You served in the intelligence services, the SBU of Ukraine, and then in 2019 you came to Russia. But before you came to Russia, for several years, you worked on behalf of the Russian government. During critical times, what led you to start working for Russia? What was it about Ukraine that led you to start working for Russia? And why did you make that decision?
And I would like to clarify my previous life. I would like to introduce myself. I definitely spent almost 19 years at SBU, at the intelligence. I was not in the intelligence department of SBU. I spent 12 years in different operative positions. I was fighting the drug trafficking, weapon trafficking, banditism. And since April 2014, after Maidan, I used to work in the SBU head office in the anti-terrorist center. And since April 2014, Ukraine started the anti-terrorist operation, and our center was heading this operation. And I was actually in the middle of this operation in eastern Ukraine. And since April 2014, you're absolutely right, I was fulfilling the tasks of the Russian Secret Service, the Russian government, and I did it within 4 years until January 2018. Just before the 1st of January 2018, I had to leave Ukraine very fast. I managed to save my family. I left everything I had in Ukraine, my apartments, houses, cars, and I left Ukraine just before being caught. And so I spent 4 years working for the Russian Secret Service. And answering the question why, after Maidan in 2014, for the people in my surrounding, it was absolutely clear that was a fascist revolution. And I was grown up by my parents. I was educated by my previous life. And I have several principles I didn't want to break, and to stay and serve to the new power was actually to go away from the principles I had in during my life. And I'm a Russian as for my national nature, because my parents went to Ukraine after graduating from the universities in the Russian part of the Soviet Union. We lived in Ukraine, we spoke Russian. We were actually having the heroes of the Great Patriotic Wars were the real examples for us. And to stop believing in what I used to believe before and stop serving those who had absolutely different principles was impossible for me. And then when I decided to work for the Russian Secret Service, it was in April 2014, and 2 weeks after a tragedy in Odessa took place, that was on the 2nd of May 2014, because what the new Kiev government started doing, it was a real crime against the Ukrainian focusing against the nation, and I decided to fight against it with every means available. And at that time, I was able to start working at the SBU headquarters, and the Russian Secret Service got in my person a very good, a very valuable source of information. That's how it was.
You said something that's very important, and it's important for the audience to understand this. In April 2014, you were placed at the head of the anti-terrorist operation, meaning you're fighting terrorists. But that was the same month that the Ukrainian government, which took over after Maidan, declared an anti-terrorist operation in the Donbass. So the terrorists we're speaking of are the Russian people, are the citizens of the Donbass who speak a language that the Ukrainian government wants to outlaw, who practice a religion that the Ukrainian government wants to suppress, who have a history and a culture that the Ukrainian government wants to deny. The terrorism we're speaking of are Russian people simply wanting to be Russian people. Is this one of the things that drove you, the fact that, you're not fighting terrorists, you're fighting your own people? And what role did that play in motivating you to start working for the Russians?
Absolutely right. You were absolutely clear when this ATO, that was on the 13th of April 2014, the Ukrainian government started an operation against its own citizens in Donetsk, Horlivka, and Luhansk, because these were the same Ukrainian citizens as in Kiev and Zhytomyr or anywhere else. As for they had the Ukrainian IDs, as for the Russian citizens, probably only dozens of them, no more, because most of the militias in May 2014, these were Ukrainian citizens as the Kiev citizens, because any anti-terrorist operation, no matter where it takes place in Russia, Ukraine, or the United States, it is regulated by several laws and norms and instructions. According to the Ukrainian legislation, the military forces, the army cannot be used within this anti-terror operation and only for the purpose to protect the military facilities. However, Ukraine started using the army since April 2014 against its own people, and everyone who was having a common sense, it was a crime to use the army against own people. You are really right. That was one of the reasons why I made this choice, and that was a really crime to use army against its own people. For example, SBU, police, that can be used, but and the army didn't want to fight in May 2014. The Ukrainian officers, they understood they were actually forced to commit a crime. However, the new government in Kiev forced the army to fight very actively because they bounded these Ukrainian soldiers with blood. And it was very wild for me to see what was happening in 2014 because I spent a lot of business trips to Donbass. I have 3 rotations in 2014 there, and I saw with my own eyes as the Ukrainian army mutated from the unwilling to fight down to the assassinating operation against its own people, because we didn't have any Russian citizens in Donetsk and Luhansk and Mariupol, in Horlivka. And it was very unacceptable for me as an officer of a special unit of the Ukrainian police, as a Berkut, I was also in Berkut, because I saw what was happening in Maidan, and also that the former Berkut soldiers who spent time on Maidan protecting the Ukrainian government started participating in this anti-terrorist terror operation in Donbass, and I was not able to understand how a Berkut officer protecting President Yanukovych, who was the legitimate president of the Ukraine, and the same Berkut officers started fighting against the separatists in Donbass, protecting the new government who was actually trying to kill him a few months before. That was a paradox I cannot really explain. However, all these things what have been seen since December 2014, and then what we saw the beginning of the anti-terror terrorist operation in April 2014. That was the main motivation for me why I made this decision.
Now, you were at that time a relatively senior officer in the SBU. You said after Maidan, you said there was no doubt in your mind that the government was fascist. In the West, we're told that the Ukrainian nationalist movements, Sloboda, Right Sector, Azov, are minorities, that these were just distinct minorities, that the Ukrainian government was a normal government. What was the role of these right-wing extreme groups in forming the government and influencing the policies that were implemented as part of the ATO?
I can really talk a lot about it because I witnessed a lot of crimes committed by these right-wing radical groups. Because in the summer 2014, I was actually the head of SBU group in Mariupol, and we were located at the airport of Mariupol, and the Dnieper battalion was located just in the next door room. This was a volunteer battalion created by the Dnepropetrovsk police, and it consisted of the Maidan activists, of the radical activists on Maidan. They started serving in this Dnieper battalion. The Azov battalion was all created in May 2014. It was all very active. And then the Shakhtarsk battalion and the another company, because Azov and Dnieper battalions are well known in the entire world. The Tornado company is not so well known, but it had real criminals. Even in the new Ukrainian government had to open the criminal cases and against the members of this Tornado company, because that was the cases of rape against children. And I saw by myself how these nationalist battalions were acting, and they were absolutely unpunished. Even the general from the National Guard, who was the military head in Mariupol in Sector M, and wasn't able to do anything with them. And these were the real bandits. They were able to get the cars on the road. They were able to take the business. They were even able to take any beautiful girl on the street and rape, but they were able to kill businessmen in order to steal an expensive car. And I also saw the cases where they're able to break into private homes in order to get something valuable, or, for example, motorboats from fishermen. I also saw the cases when the Mariupolian were killed or set off the cars because the cars were expensive, and then they transferred these cars to the other part of Ukraine with the new license plates. That's were real cases. I saw it with my own eyes. So in summer 2014, I saw the first time the Nazi signs. That was the Azov battalions. I saw actually the Nazi signs on helmets, the swastika. That was a real shock at that time. It was something that was really unacceptable, but even a year after, it became quite a usual thing, and a couple of years after, it became absolutely normal for the entire country. This fascist ideology penetrated the country through this small group of these criminal battalions, came into the entire society in the Ukraine, and has been cultivating for in all public groups, starting from the kindergartens down to the top level officials. It is a crime not to see it.
It is a crime not to see it, and yes, the West remains blind to this reality. it's very frustrating as a historian for the world to fail to understand the foundations of this conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Russia's accused of invading Ukraine in February 2022, but nobody talks about the invasion of Ukraine by the nationalists, the occupation of Mariupol. I mean, when they speak of the rape of Mariupol, the Ukrainian nationalists speak of the Russian liberation of Mariupol. They call it the rape of Mariupol. But the rape of Mariupol took place in April, May, June of 2014 through September. So thank you for bringing that up. You stayed on now as a agent of the Russian Special Services. You stayed with the SBU through a very critical period of time from 2014 until you had to leave in 2018. But during that time, the relationship was defined by the Minsk Accords, ostensibly a pathway to peace, a negotiated settlement. But we now know that it was always a fraud, that Minsk was never meant to be implemented by either the Ukrainian government or their British and French, their German and French masters. Did you see this while you were there? Did you know that Minsk was a fraud? Did you know that it was simply to buy time to rebuild a Ukrainian army? What were your experiences when it comes to the truthfulness of the Ukrainian government during this period?
I will give you a real example, and I can really confirm it with the documents. When I was working for the Russian Secret Service, I provided around 70,000 different documents to Moscow. And there were some documents from this period of time when the Minsk agreements were in power. The Minsk I agreement was signed in September 2014, and Minsk II agreement was signed in winter 2014. Both agreements were actually signed after Ukrainian army defeated in Donbass Minsk I after the battle at Ilovaisk, when the Donbas militia made a significant counteroffensive and freed the territory from the Russian border down to Mariupol. And Minsk II agreement was signed after losing Donetsk airport of Donetsk and the operation in the Baltic. Ukraine suffered significant losses. I was also on a business trip there in Donbass. I was in Kramatorsk in the SBU office there, and I saw how that was Crosscheck called it was a beautiful move out from the Baltic. But I saw these soldiers, these were just the rest, absolutely demoralized soldiers without any control. The army defeated, had this very significant defeat. That's why Ukraine signed Minsk II agreement. So back to your question, I had in my hands the documents. For example, the decisions of the United Intelligence Committee at the Ukrainian presidents. This was a body consisting of all the intelligence officers, top officers of Ukraine, and the head of this committee was the Ukrainian president, and the deputy of this committee head was the head of the Ukrainian Security Council. And it also makes some recommendations to the different intelligence services of Ukraine what to do after the Minsk agreement. One of the decisions was in about 14 bullets. It was the minutes of meeting of this committee. The first 5 bullets were about the monitoring and the fulfillment of the Minsk agreements. Everything was devoted to fulfill the Minsk agreements in order to stop the military actions and to strive for freedom. The first 5 points, 5 bullets, were actually for this Minsk agreements. However, the next 5 points were devoted to the Ukrainian intelligence service and to prepare a catalog of targets in Donetsk, and Luhansk People's Republics to prepare the reconnaissance units to carry out the military operations in Donetsk and Luhansk to strengthen the reconnaissance units at the separation line. The first moves were for the peace in order to fulfill the Minsk agreement. However, the further points both were actually for the country in order to improve, make the intelligence, the reconnaissance in order to keep striking the Donetsk and Luhansk republics. So in this case, I saw this two-faced policy of Kiev in this one document, this minutes of meeting.
Fascinating. Again, in the West, you won't hear this. In the West, you'll hear that it was Russia that was opposing Minsk, that Russia was the troublemaker, that Ukraine only wanted peace. And so thank you for providing this invaluable firsthand observation. Perhaps this is a more difficult question. Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, when he speaks about the goals and objectives of the special military operation, speaks about denazification. In fact, he spoke about this at St. Petersburg. He said that, when people talk about diplomacy and negotiating a peace, the West always says, denazification, that's a dream. It'll never happen. It's impossible. And yet Vladimir Putin said, no, it's a necessity. It's an absolute requirement. So denazification is the policy of Russia. You're somebody who knows Ukraine from the inside. You've seen the rise of the fascists. You've seen how they've layered themselves in control. How do you denazify Ukraine? What's required to denazify? Can you have a negotiated peace settlement that leads to denazification, or do you have to have unconditional surrender?
I will give not a very popular answer. Without full control over Ukrainian territory, the denazification is not possible, because the grains of this criminal ideology remain. We are not able to control it. Even now, Maidan was more than 12 years ago. Now we do see actually there were massive brainwashing of the Ukrainian people, first of all, of young people. Now we have an absolutely new Ukrainian generation which thinks or considers this Nazi ideology as the right one. No matter what decisions are made at the top level, but without impacting the school textbooks, you cannot do the denazification. When the special military operation started, I was working on the front line, and we entered the cities, the freed cities in Luhansk, and one of the tasks I had at that moment, we actually were looking what textbooks, what literature was used at schools in the Luhansk region, and we also we understood how Ukraine made this brainwashing even for small kids starting from the age of 5. Because even the 5-year-old children were getting this Nazi ideology. So the children were prepared even from the very young age. And we have a lot of videos in YouTube when the Ukrainian children give this scream Sieg Heil, or show the Nazi signs. So without this control of the educational process, the denazification is not possible. Unfortunately, it is so. The example of the Nazi Germany in 1945 shows that only the total control of the territory can make this denazification successful. So within these 12 years, Ukrainian government created such a propaganda system and the system of total control over population, so the denazification is not possible. So in this case, we needed to break it down, and then we can really beat out of the brains of the mind this ideology step by step.
I'm just, my mind, umopomrachitso is a Russian word, mind-bending about this, because you speak about the education of the children, the brainwashing of the children. And in the West, we don't understand that. Repeatedly, we see the imagery And I was imagining the imagery in my head as you were speaking. Simple civilians being wrapped to a pole with plastic wrapping so that other people can come by and hit them and slap them and spank them. The dehumanization of people. This happens throughout Ukraine. They take people who, I don't know, were they accused of something, accused of speaking Russian. They paint their face green like orcs, and then they wrap them with saran wrap or plastic wrap, and they beat them, and they leave them standing there. And how can people, normal human beings, walk by and see this? It's a frustrating thing for me. I don't understand how you can call yourself a human being and walk by somebody with that. But as you said, this is the byproduct of brainwashing that from the age. For instance, I saw a video. I might be getting this wrong, but if you hate Moscow's jump, and then all the kids are jumping, and these are teenagers. It's like a kid's game. Jump, jump, jump. I think you're right. I mean, I don't get to make Russian policy. I don't want to make Russian policy, but I do want this war to end. And this war can never end without total denazification of Ukraine. I think history shows that if you leave, it's not just history, life shows, you have to excise the totality of the cancer to save the victim. And if you leave Ukraine with the cancer of banderism living in the West, residing in the minds of people, it'll just grow and metastasize. You're somebody who has a close relationship with the Russian special services of Russia. Are you telling them this? Are you saying that there can be no denazification without the total defeat and occupation of Ukraine? Is this a case that you've made to the Russian government?
Scott, I'm currently a journalist. I'm doing the journalist investigations, and my main topic is the military crimes of the Kiev regime. And that's this topic what I'm constantly raising up in my reports. In this case, that's how I deliver this information to the Russian government, to the Russian society, the Ukrainian society as well, because many Ukrainians read what I write. My previous colleagues are constantly trying to kill me. They also made several attempts to do it. However, we're trying to bring over our point of view to the different audiences in the West, because my channel is in 11 languages from English to Chinese. We're trying to bring over our information to the target audiences in the West in order to show our truth. You're absolutely right. The West is not willing or cannot see it, because the propaganda is working in the West, not even versed in Ukraine. Something what is actually not really desirable is cut off, and this information it doesn't arrive at citizens, at people in the West, and we are trying to provide this alternative point of view. That's how we do our best in this case.
Let's just start with the seriousness of this, because sometimes you say, I'm a journalist, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm doing this. They tried to kill you. They sent 2 people to Moscow to blow you up. They put in 3 people. Okay, I'm a bad intelligence officer, but they put they put an explosive device under your car and they injured you. You were seriously injured. This isn't a game. This isn't this isn't words. They tried to murder you because they are afraid of what you are saying. If they weren't afraid, they'd let you say it. But the fact that your words, your actions are the truth, they have to kill the truth. Am I misrepresenting this at all?
You're absolutely right. The May 1st reason was to keep me silent in order to stop me making my investigations, and the second reason was actually to punish the one who did a significant harm to Ukraine, because my work is a significant mistake of the Ukrainian counterintelligence service, because when I left SBU, there were significant repressions against those who were not able to see my activity, and that's why they are definitely angry against me. And reason number one is to shut me up and to stop me doing my job. As for these murder attempts, there was a chain of more than 5 people. They were absolutely different. Some they were just observers. Another one delivered the explosive through the border. Another one actually put this explosive under my car. And as far as I know, they were caught and sentenced. And now I'm waiting. They will be put into the prison and they will spend significant time in a Russian prison. And I think the country which is came out with the special military operation should introduce the capital punishment for the mass terrorism with a significant number of victims. However, our Russian legislation doesn't have this capital punishment and can only sentence to 25, 22 years in prison. However, if you are 30 years old, it means that you won't leave the prison anywhere because nobody will kill them in the prison, but they will definitely lose their health in prison. 20 years in prison, that's not the sugar you like. And I can really thank the Russian Secret Service who that investigated and caught these executors. I was injured into the hand and into my leg. The explosive was under the passenger seat, and the car cannot be repaired. However, I spent some time in a hospital and I'm fully recovered. I can continue my work. They were not able to threaten me.
I can testify by the firmness of your handshake that you fully recovered. So, but look, here's the thing: the U.S. government has sanctioned you. You are a sanctioned individual because of the work that you do. They're afraid of you. They're afraid of your work. Mainstream media in America won't touch you because you're a Russian propagandist and such. I'm an independent journalist, and I work with a category of fellow independent journalists who have audiences that will watch this program. Your work is published in English. You said you publish in a number of languages, including English. How can an American audience find your work? Tell them how to find where you write your material, where you publish your material.
Also heading the center UKR Leaks Center. We have our own Telegram channel, which is called UKR Leaks, and there are also the copies of the channels in UKR Leaks Chinese or UKR Leaks English. And I also communicate with different Western journalists like you are not afraid to be against the main narratives of the Western media. And also was a speaker in a Steven Seagal's movie. I know that you was also in this movie and this documentary, The Final Countdown. That's a documentary project by Steven Seagal. And I was also an expert on Ukrainian issues, first of all on Maidan issues, and how to introduce the Nazi ideology in the Ukrainian society. I also have an opportunity to bring over my information, my views to the Western audience. However, should do even small things in order to get a big result.
You said when you described your work, your past work with on behalf of the Russian government while you were still with the SBU, you said you provided 70,000 documents to the Russian government, which means that your information isn't the typical whispers that human sources gather from bars and taxis. You had actual documents to demonstrate this. You've just written a book about Maidan that is based upon these very documents. Can you? Why don't you show the audience your book and tell them a little bit about your book and what's in it?
I would like to clarify that's my 7th book because I wrote 2 literature books. That's 2 novels two novels about my life as the Russian intelligence service, and five documentary books. One of them is about corruption, another one about the crimes against children. That's the very scaring topic. I never thought I would be able to write anything, something like this. And this is the scaring, awful topic. And the last book is called The Bloody Maidan and the Western Footprint and the SBU documents. When I was working in the SBU head office, headquarter, I had a lot of documents of the SBU counter intelligence department, and this SBU used to work for the government during the Maidan time, and this counterintelligence division of SBU was actually following and observing and foreigners and some non-commercial organizations, non-government organizations, which were working in Ukraine. And when I read the documents this counterintelligence division collected at that time, I understand the level of engagement of Western country and Western secret services NGOs in Ukraine, because they did a number of special operations. They did the provocations. They financed the right-wing radical groups. They actually wanted to make this situation on Maidan so huge, and they brought people to conflict to fight against the police. And when I saw these documents, I understood how everything was taking place. Everything was in just a discovery for me when I look at this document. For example, Jeffrey Pipe, the U.S. ambassador, gave clear instructions. We need to pay After-Maidan group, and the After-Maidan leader leads the crowd to capture the Verkhovna Rada, the Ukrainian parliament. 2 days after it, it becomes clear that this particular movement against the parliament was financed by CIA and the American and U.S. embassy. I wrote this book, and I was even shocked by my own book, by myself, because it has really, there were no limitations for Western powers to act at Maidan. Scott, that's for you, this book.
Thank
you very much.
Just to make it very clear, there are people like myself and others who say that the Maidan events were in fact a CIA coup against Ukraine. And of course, we're called propagandists, and we are manufacturing a narrative. It was an exercise of democracy that we're told. What happened was a revolution of the people. In this book, unequivocal proof that this was a CIA U.S. government operation, that the U.S. government, the CIA, was directing, not just monitoring, but directing the operations of those who carried out the violence in the Maidan. Am I correct?
Correct. Absolutely correct. If I can tell you very brief, in this book I tried to prove with official SBU documents at that time, and I tried to prove, and I managed to prove, as I think, that Maidan was financed, organized, and managed by secret Western secret services and governments. First of all, by the US, and then by EU. First of all, the United States, Germany, and Poland, who financed and organized and managed the Maidan activities.
Now, for those watching who might be intimidated by the fact that this is a book in the Russian language, I understand that there will be an electronic version of this book coming out in English in about 2 weeks. Could you tell us about that and how people might be able to access that book?
We will upload links to the English version on our English channel of UKR Leaks Telegram channel, and everyone who would like to familiarize it can do it. There is a problem with the to translate all the documents in this book, because I have thousands of documents about Maidan, and the book has probably dozens or hundreds of documents. For example, here. And these are real, original SBU documents at the Maidan time. These are facts and the monitoring reports, the phone calls, minutes, the room monitoring of surveillance documents, some analytical documents by the SBU counterintelligence division. There is one document given in this book, and I translated it from Ukrainian into Russian. All these documents were originally in Ukrainian. It was, for example, analytical report by the SBU counterintelligence division about U.S. presence in Ukraine during the current political situation, and it describes what the U.S. government is doing, what the U.S. government is going to do when everything goes not against the U.S. plan. They were actually, this internal SBU documents say that the U.S. government and CIA were willing actually to bring down the legitimate president. Unfortunately, the Western top secret services and the government succeeded.
There's a couple sayings in the West. The truth will out, and another one is the truth will set you free. What we're discussing here is the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth about what happened in Maidan. And this is the foundation upon which the special military operation is built. Vasily, I can't thank you enough for coming here and talking about this, introducing your book, talking about yourself. Everybody needs to read this book. Everybody needs to go to your website. Could you tell them once again what your website is? UkrainianSecrets.com?
UKRleaks.com.
English, for example.
Okay, there it is. UKRleaks.com.
UKR
LEAKS.com. And in 2 weeks, you can get it in English and read it. And let's get this story told. Yeah.
It would be better to use our Telegram channel, which is the UKR Leaks, because these Telegram channels, we have 11 Telegram channels in different languages. Well, no matter what you speak, Italian, German, Serbian, Portuguese, and definitely English.
Well, definitely English, because unfortunately, that's the language I speak, and it's the language the audience speaks. I want to thank the audience again for tuning in. This has been a very special edition of the Russia House with Scott Ritter. Again, I want to thank Vasily for joining me, and I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. This is about the truth. People try to intimidate you by making you fear things, but the foundation of fear are things you don't understand. When you don't understand something, you're afraid of it. And the best way to overcome your fears is to empower yourself with knowledge and information. This is the knowledge and information you need to prove the West, to prove the United States government liars when it comes to how this conflict in Ukraine started. You can't solve a problem unless you accurately define it to begin with. And unless you understand that this problem was started by the CIA facilitating a coup d'etat, there can be no solution. Again, thanks for joining me, and